There's a particular kind of silence in an office that only comes before a storm. Not the loud kind with sirens or memos. No, this one arrived in polished Italian leather shoes, clicking against the marble floors like a countdown. That was my first impression of Blake Thornton. He didn't nod at the receptionist, didn't look up when the security guard greeted him. He just walked through the front doors of Brightstone and keen like he owned it. Technically, now he did. At 34, freshly minted from some Silicon Valley advisory board and draped in arrogance, he was named our new CEO in a company-wide email filled with phrases like fresh vision and agile transformation. I'd read enough of those emails to know what they really meant. Someone upstairs wanted change, and someone down here is going to bleed for it. From my office on the 12th floor, tucked between finance and legal, I watched his reflection in the glass wall. I had 17 years at Brightstone. 17 years of building trust, negotiating billion-dollar contracts across 3 continents, learning the nuance behind every boardroom smirk and every half-polite silence from our Asian partners. My title wasn't flashy, but my influence ran deep. Blake never looked in my direction. He moved through the floors like a tourist with a checklist. Meetings interrupted mid-sentence. Department heads answering questions they didn't fully understand. Interns try not to breathe too loudly. Blake thrived in that chaos. He wasn't cruel, just indifferent. The kind of man who thought the word experience was outdated. The kind who believed leadership came from energy, not wisdom. At lunch, I joined the usual table, what the younger staff jokingly called the old guard. No one said it outright, but we all felt it. We were being audited, evaluated. We were relics from a time before Slack, before synergy decks, before someone could be hired to lead without understanding what we actually did. "You think he even knows what you do, Dan?" Rachel from compliance asked. I stir my black coffee, no sugar. I hope not, because when men like Blake finally notice you, it's rarely good. Later that afternoon, I passed him in the hallway. He looked right through me, didn't even register the badge on my chest, let alone the name. I was holding a folder containing the performance metrics for our East Asia accounts. Metrics he'd no doubt quoted his next town hall as if they'd fallen from the sky. He had no idea I had been the one flying to Taipei when no one else would. The one who smoothed over a misinterpreted contract clause in Hanoi that could have cost us millions. The one who once explained, over dinner in Beijing, the cultural difference between compromise and disrespect to save a fragile merger. But none of that fit in his spreadsheet, so I was invisible. And yet, I felt in my bones something was shifting. The quiet hum of the office had changed. Too many closed doors. Too many meetings without agendas. Even Linda from HR, who had seen more backroom shakeups than anyone, avoided my gaze. That was when I knew. Change had arrived, and it didn't care who you were. Only what line item you belonged to. I went back to my desk, opened a report draft for our partners in Shenzhen, and stared at the email I was supposed to send. Routine stuff. A minor delay in financial reporting, written in polite Mandarin, phrased with the care of someone who understood how easy it was to lose face in certain circles. I finished the email and hit send. But I knew my name was already on some list. By Monday, the air in the office felt different. Not tense. No, tension was too alive a word. This was quieter, duller. The kind of silence that settles in just before a building is condemned. You could hear it in the way keyboards tapped a little faster, how people answered emails within seconds just to show they were still needed. I arrived early, as always. The security guy downstairs gave me a tight smile. He didn't know anything, but he knew something. That's how it goes. The janitor knows first. Then the front desk. HR's the last to admit it, even to themselves. At 9:17 a.m., the first one went. Gerald from procurement. 21 years with the company. I'd seen him onboard two entire vendor systems that basically kept our production pipeline stable during the 2008 crisis. But all Blake saw was a legacy system and a man who didn't talk like a TED speaker. Gerald was called into a meeting with no subject line and walked out 20 minutes later with a box of personal items. No goodbye email. No handshake. Just gone. By noon, it was 3 more. All over 40. All with tenure longer than Blake had been alive when the company was founded. I watched it unfold like a chess match. except only one player knew they were playing. No one said it aloud, but everyone knew this wasn't about performance. It was about control. Blake wasn't just restructuring. He was rewriting the rules of who mattered here. And he didn't need a reason. He had the board's blessing. That was all the cover he needed. That afternoon, during the department heads meeting, I sat 2 seats from the front. Blake ran it like a tech founder on a sugar rush, clicking through slides packed with jargon, agility, alignment, redundancy, optimization. I knew what those words meant. I translated them for years. They meant people. When he said cross-functional overlap, I knew exactly who he was referring to. Me. But I didn't flinch. I kept my posture steady, face unreadable. I took notes, even though the entire presentation was just noise. Because that's how you survive men like him. You pretend to listen while you prepare. After the meeting, as we filtered out into the hallway, Blake finally noticed me. "Daniel, right?" he asked, his tone casual, too casual for a man who held people's lives in a spreadsheet. "You've been with us a while." 17 years, I said. He nodded as if that impressed him, though it didn't. "Remind me again, what's your focus area?" "Strategic partnerships. I handle our East Asian relations, Shenzhen, Osaka, Seoul. I also advise on cultural integration for our overseas teams." He blinked, clearly not expecting that many syllables. "Oh, right. We got a translation firm on retainer, don't we?" I smiled politely. "It's not about language, Blake. It's about trust." But he was already moving on, scrolling through his phone like he was looking for a better conversation. Back at my desk, I stared at the framed photo on the shelf. Me shaking hands with Mr. Ling from Gold Peak Tech years ago in Shanghai. That handshake had taken months to earn. Blake would never understand that. He thought relationships could be ordered like office chairs. The next morning, Linda from HR walked past my desk and paused for just a second, barely long enough to register. But her eyes told me everything. I wasn't just on the list. I was near the top. The email came at 10:02 a.m. Subject: Meeting, Conference Room 4B. From Executive Office. Attendees: Blake Thornton, Daniel Caldwell. No agenda. No attachments. No context. I stared at it for a moment, letting the cursor hover over the subject line like it might change if I waited long enough. It didn't. I closed my laptop, adjusted my cuffs, and stood slowly, like a man walking into the eye of something he could already smell in the air. I passed Linda from HR on the way. She looked up, then quickly looked away. When I entered the room, Blake was already seated at the head of the table, sleeves rolled to the elbows like he was about to do something surgical. A closed folder sat in front of him. Linda sat 2 chairs away, her posture stiff, hands folded in her lap like someone attending a memorial. "Daniel," Blake said with a politician's smile. "Thanks for coming." I didn't answer. I simply sat. He opened the folder, not dramatically, just enough to signal that the script had already been written. "We've been reviewing the organizational structure, and, after careful consideration," he began, each word polished, emptied of meaning, "we've decided to consolidate certain legacy roles." Legacy. That's what I was now. A relic. Your position, while valuable in its time, no longer aligns with the forward trajectory of Brightstone and Keene. I didn't blink. "We've onboarded a multilingual firm out of Singapore to handle our East Asia communications," he continued. "They're scalable, cost-effective, and offer 24-hour turnaround." Linda slid a beige envelope toward me, her expression frozen in a practiced mask. 2 months severance," she said quietly, "plus accrued vacation. It's a generous offer." I looked down at the envelope, but didn't touch it. Blake leaned back, mistaking my silence for resistance. "I know this isn't easy, but change, real change, requires tough decisions. This is about streamlining. Nothing personal." I finally spoke, my voice level. "Do you even remember the name of our partner in Shenzhen?" He opened his mouth, then paused. I think it's Mr. Liang." "Ling," I corrected. "You met him once. He doesn't forget faces. Or disrespect." Blake shifted slightly in his seat. "We'll manage. These firms know how to adapt." I stood up, slow and deliberate. "No, they don't adapt. They remember." He offered his hand, but I didn't take it. I nodded to Linda, then turned to leave. At the doorway, I paused. Good luck on Monday. Monday, he echoed, confused. But I was already gone. As I walked down the hallway, I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel humiliation. I felt something else, something colder, like the stillness before a landslide. I had been underestimated before, ignored, even replaced, but never by someone so utterly unprepared to face the consequences. Outside, the wind had picked up, rain clouds gathering over Chicago, slow and heavy. I didn't check my phone, didn't check emails. I just kept walking, past the security desk, through the revolving doors, and into the street, without once looking back. Because I knew exactly what was coming. And this time, I wouldn't have to lift a finger. The weekend came like a long, slow exhale. There were no alarms, no traffic, no lanyard with my name clipped to my chest. Just silence. Heavy, full-bodied silence. The kind that makes you realize how loud your life has been until someone takes it from you. I spent most of Saturday in my garage, sorting through boxes I hadn't touched in years. Old notebooks from business trips, photos from supplier visits in Seoul and Tokyo, a ceramic dragon someone had given me in Shenzhen, with a note in calligraphy I never had the heart to translate. All relics, they'd say now. But to me, they were proof. Not of title, not of power, but of presence. I didn't cry. I wasn't angry. But there was an ache, deep and slow, like something sacred had been disturbed. 17 years of patience, of learning, of doing the work no one else wanted to do. And it had all been reduced to a folder, a signature, and a silence that followed me out the door. Sunday evening, as the sky over Chicago bruised into navy and gold, I sat at my desk and opened my laptop. No dramatic music, no revenge soundtrack, just a man updating his resume, not for validation, but for readiness. Because I knew this wasn't the end of the story. By 9 a.m. Monday, I was dressed, not in a suit, but in quiet confidence, crisp shirt, dark slacks, and that old leather folder I'd taken to every serious meeting since 2011. I wasn't walking into a fight. I was walking into a future that didn't need permission. Lawson and Reed Global Advisors had called me the day after I was let go. An old connection, someone I once helped navigate a cultural blunder in Hong Kong, had reached out quietly. They weren't interested in job titles. They were interested in me. Their office was smaller, warmer. The receptionist smiled like it meant something. The waiting room didn't have glass awards. It had art. And the man who greeted me, Thomas Reed himself, shook my hand like he already knew I belonged. We talked for over an hour. Not about KPIs, not about performance reviews. We talked about nuance, about how business in East Asia isn't built on margins, but on manners, on how relationships take years to earn and seconds to lose, on how sometimes the most strategic thing a company can do is shut up and listen. When I left, I didn't just walk out with a job offer. I walked out with something Blake could never understand: respect. That afternoon, back home, I brewed tea the old-fashioned way. No machine, just water, heat, and time. I sat by the window as the city pulsed quietly below, and I watched the clouds settle again. My phone buzzed. 2 messages from old colleagues. They replaced you with a firm in Singapore. Just rotating account managers now. No dedicated person. He told the board you were a liability. Said you clung to outdated methods. Called you a gatekeeper. I stared at the screen for a long moment. A gatekeeper. If only they understood. I never cared for the gate. I cared for the people inside. The culture. The trust. The promise that when things went wrong, someone would pick up the phone and say, "I'll fix it," and then actually fix it. That was never about ego. It was about honor. And as I looked out at the fading daylight, I realized something deeply comforting. They could take my badge. They could remove my name from the internal directory. But what they couldn't do was erase the memory of what I'd built. Mr. Ling still remembered. And so did I. The storm hadn't started yet, but it would. And this time, I would watch it from higher ground. Wednesday morning arrived with the kind of sky that doesn't make promises: gray, indifferent, and still. I sat at my desk at Lawson and Reed, a mug of strong black coffee in one hand, the other resting on the smooth wooden arm of a chair that still smelled faintly of varnish. The office was quiet, respectful. Here, silence meant focus, not fear. I'd only been here 2 days, but already I felt something I hadn't felt in years: alignment. The team didn't hover. They didn't micromanage. They asked questions that mattered, and when I answered, they listened. I wasn't a legacy here. I was a foundation, and that was when I knew it was time. I opened my drawer, pulled out a weathered Rolodex card I hadn't used in years. One number, written in black ink, slightly smudged. Mr. Ling, direct line. He had given it to me over hot tea in Shanghai 7 years ago, after a tense negotiation where I'd kept my word when others wavered. Use it only when it matters, he'd said. You'll know when. I did now. I didn't send an email. No corporate trail. I picked up the desk phone and dialed slowly, deliberately. 2 rings. Then a voice. Mississippi Lane? I smiled. It's Daniel Caldwell now. There was a pause. Then warmth. Mr. Caldwell. I had wondered. I owe you an apology, I said, tone low and honest. For the abrupt disruption. For being replaced without explanation. You were not replaced, he said sharply. You were erased. There is a difference. I let the silence breathe. I'm no longer with Brightstone, I continued. But I thought you deserved to hear the truth. Not from a presentation deck. From a person. I explained it all. No bitterness. Just facts. How I was cut. How the firm now handling their account didn't understand tone, didn't understand timing. How they'd sent a quarterly report on Lunar New Year and used the wrong form of address for his deputy. It wasn't just about language. It was about respect. When I finished, Mr. Ling was silent for a moment. Then he exhaled, slow and deep. Where are you now? Lawson and Reed, I replied. We don't have your account. Not yet. I didn't call to pitch. I called because relationships deserve honesty. Another pause, then a quiet chuckle. Not mocking, but knowing. I have been waiting for this call, he said. Perhaps it is time we reconsider who our real partners are. We ended with formal goodbyes. Not rushed. Not vague. Every word had weight. I hung up the phone and stared out the window, the Chicago skyline blurred slightly by the soft drizzle that had begun to fall. One call. No threats. No fanfare. Just the first quiet tremor beneath Blake Thornton's glass tower. By Friday, the wheels were already turning. An invitation for a closed-door meeting with our senior team. No public announcement. No press release. Just an informal conversation between gentlemen who understood that business doesn't run on metrics alone. It runs on memory. Meanwhile, back at Brightstone, the rumors started. Gold Peak's been quiet. Haven't responded to our last inquiry. Blake's pushing for another meeting, but they keep stalling. I didn't need to be there to hear it. It came to me in the form of 3-word texts from ex-colleagues. They miss you. It's falling apart. And I hadn't lifted a finger. Yet, it happened on a Monday morning. Of course it did. Corporate disasters love Mondays. They arrive just as people are trying to shake off the weekend, still pretending their inbox can wait, still convincing themselves that this week might finally be different. It was just after 9 a.m. when the car pulled up in front of Lawson and Reed's downtown office. Unbranded. Discreet. Inside it were 3 men in dark suits and quiet shoes. Mr. Ling, his deputy Mr. Tao, and their legal advisor from Hong Kong. No cameras. No fanfare. Just precision. I was already in the building, reviewing the meeting room for the 3rd time. Nothing flashy, just polished. The kind of space that said, we don't chase. We host. By 9:30, the room was full. On one side, our executive team, Thomas Reed included, calm, composed. On the other, the delegation from Gold Peak Tech, as dignified and unreadable as always. I stood near the end of the table, not at the head, not making a show of anything. And then something remarkable happened. Before anyone else spoke, Mr. Ling turned to me. Mr. Caldwell, he said, nodding slowly. We've missed your presence. The room went still. That one sentence, spoken softly, shifted the entire center of gravity in the building. I didn't thank him. I didn't smile. I bowed slightly, just enough. Because that's what respect looks like. Not volume. Precision. The meeting was long. Deliberate. Contracts were reviewed, but what mattered most wasn't written on the paper. It was in the eye contact, in the acknowledgement that this partnership had been wounded, and now it was healing carefully. No one mentioned Brightstone. They didn't need to. By the time the meeting ended, Mr. Ling stood and extended his hand across the table. To me, we are prepared to move forward, he said, provided the relationship is led with the same integrity it once was. I met his hand, firm and steady. It will be. As they exited the building, I watched from the window. The Chicago wind had picked up, carrying a crispness that felt almost ceremonial. By noon, the confirmation came through. Gold Peak Tech had officially terminated all remaining agreements with Brightstone and Keene. Effective immediately. No press release. No media briefing. Just silence, the kind that echoes longer than noise ever could. That afternoon, I received a single forwarded email from a former colleague, a frantic internal memo sent by Blake to his department heads. We need to assess the impact of Gold Peak's withdrawal. Urgent call, with legal at 3. Someone give me Caldwell's number. I didn't reply. I didn't need to, because by now he understood. I hadn't left his company. I'd taken something far more valuable with me, the trust he never earned and could never replace. They say when empires fall, it's loud, crashing walls, blazing fires, the screams of kings in ruins. But in corporate America, collapse is quiet. It begins with a postponed call, a meeting canceled with vague apologies, a partner who suddenly needs to reevaluate the terms. By the end of the week, Brightstone and Keene was bleeding from a dozen tiny cuts. No headlines, just quiet withdrawals. Vendor contracts not renewed. Regional partners taking a pause. Legal teams asking for clarification on clauses they'd never questioned before. And me? I didn't make a single call. All I did was answer the ones that came to me. A former client from Seoul reached out. She'd heard I was now with Lawson and Reed. You always understood the space between the words, she said. Can we speak? Another message from a supplier in Hanoi, one I'd defended years ago in a pricing dispute. We were approached by Brightstone again. We said no, not because I'd asked them to, because they remembered. And memory is currency in this game. At Lawson and Reed, the phones were busier than usual, but the tone was different. Clients didn't come to us out of panic. They came for refuge, for something solid, for someone who wouldn't treat trust like a commodity. Thomas Reed dropped by my office late Thursday afternoon. No tie, just a coffee in hand and that slight smirk older executives wear when they know they made the right bet. You're not just helping us grow, he said. You're helping them fall. I shook my head. They're doing that part themselves. Back at Brightstone, panic was turning into pressure. Layoffs resumed, this time without severance. Budgets frozen. HR issued a vague morale survey no one filled out. The younger hires, the ones Blake brought in with promises of agility and disruption, were the first to leave. Because unlike us old relics, they didn't stick around when the water got cold. Friday evening, I received another forwarded email. This one from someone I hadn't heard from in years. Blake's trying to spin the Gold Peak loss as a cultural mismatch. Says East Asia was always a difficult market. He's blaming you, Daniel. Calling you a gatekeeper who couldn't evolve. I read it twice, not because it hurt, but because it amused me. Blake didn't understand that evolution isn't about speed. It's about survival. I hadn't evolved to keep up with trends. I'd evolved to stay human in a world that forgets people aren't data points. So I closed the email, took one last look at the city outside, glowing soft in the dusk. Then I turned off the lights and left the office, my shadow long on the wall behind me. Because the beauty of silent collapse is that you never have to raise your voice. You just have to wait for the weight of their own arrogance to pull them under. And I was very, very patient. It was a little after 7 a.m. when my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't pick up, but something in the rhythm of the ring felt intentional. So I answered. Daniel, came the voice, polished, tense, cracking at the edges. Blake Thornton. I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time. You are, I replied deadpan. But let's pretend you're not. He forced a chuckle. It sounded brittle, like glass pressed too hard. I was wondering if we could talk, he said, speeding up. Maybe meet. Clear the air. See if there's any opportunity to align. There it was. Not an apology. Not an admission. Just a man drowning, trying to pretend he was still giving swimming lessons. I assume this isn't a social call, I said. Of course not, he replied too quickly. I'm reaching out because, look, We had a rough transition. Things move fast, maybe too fast, but I think there's room for collaboration. Consulting informal insight. No need to discuss titles or press releases. Translation, come save me, but quietly. And don't make me say I was wrong. I let the silence stretch. 5 seconds. 10. He squirmed on the line. I could hear it. I'm listening, I said finally. But if you want a favor, you'll ask for one. Directly. Like a man. He didn't expect that. He cleared his throat. I want your help. There. I said it. With what? We've lost Gold Peak. You know that. But now there's talk. Rumors. Other partners are pausing discussions. Legal's panicking. Our CFO won't stop pacing. I need someone who can stabilize the relationships we still have. These people. You built those bridges. I stood, walking slowly to the window of my office, overlooking downtown Chicago. My reflection stared back. Me, but steadier than I'd seen myself in years. And what do I get, Blake? I asked. He hesitated. I'll pay your rate. Consulting. We can start with a few calls. Maybe join some negotiations. No, I interrupted. Not enough. What do you want? I want the record corrected, I said flatly. You told people I was outdated, that I was a gatekeeper, that I couldn't evolve, that I was disposable. That was heat of the moment. No, I cut him off. That was cowardice wearing a suit. There was silence on the other end. I'll admit I underestimated you, he finally said, and I could hear the sourness in his mouth. But if we don't fix this, I'll lose everything I've built. You didn't build anything, Blake, I said, voice ice cold now. You inherited a house and thought knocking down walls made you an architect. His voice changed then, lower, harder. You're enjoying this, aren't you? I laughed. Not loudly, just enough for him to hear the control in it. No, I said, I'm just making sure you feel this. Because people like you don't learn from failure. You learn from humiliation. He exhaled sharply. Then what the hell do you want from me? I smiled. Meet me. Tomorrow. 9 a.m. My office. Don't be late. And come without a pitch deck. I hung up. No goodbyes. No grace. The next day, he showed up 10 minutes late. Of course he did. Same designer coat. Same $10,000 watch. But the posture had changed, no longer upright. He walked like a man dragging the weight of his own undoing. Daniel, he said, stepping into the conference room I'd reserved. Thank you for... Sit. He did. I'm not here to save you, I began. Let's be clear. I'm here to explain, one last time, why the ground beneath your feet is falling away. And why it's not an earthquake. It's erosion. And you caused it. You're punishing me. No, I said. I'm teaching you. Because someday, if you're lucky enough to survive this, you'll realize leadership isn't about power. It's about responsibility. And right now, you're the most irresponsible man in the building. He looked away, jaw tightening. So what's your proposal? I leaned forward, voice low but piercing. I'll help you. Quietly. For the sake of those still working there. People who don't deserve to lose their jobs because of your pride. But you will issue a formal internal memo correcting the record. Naming me. Apologizing. Publicly. His face flushed. That's humiliating. Exactly. And if I refuse? I stood up. Then watched the rest of your client base burn. I walked to the door, opened it slowly. Make your choice, Blake. He didn't speak. Didn't move. But I knew. Men like him never see the blade until it's resting on their pride. And I just pressed it in, firmly, without hate. Just precision. Just like he deserved. It was 10 a.m. sharp when Blake walked into the boardroom on the 25th floor of Brightstone and Keene's headquarters. He wore the same navy suit he always did on important days, the kind with barely visible pinstripes and just enough tailoring to whisper power. But this time, it hung differently, creased at the sleeves, collar slightly askew. Like the armor no longer fit the man inside. 12 board members were already seated. None smiled. CFO to the left. Legal counsel to the right. And at the head, Chairman Ellison, who hadn't spoken to Blake in person in nearly 4 months. Today, he'd requested a face-to-face. Blake cleared his throat and began. He didn't start with an apology. Of course not. He began with a spreadsheet. A deck of charts. Graphs. Projections. All fiction. He talked about market volatility. About unexpected transitions. about growing pains. And then, finally, he mentioned the name he had tried to erase. Daniel Caldwell's departure, he said, eyes flickering sideways, was perhaps premature. Silence. Chairman Ellison raised an eyebrow. Premature. Blake shifted in his chair. In hindsight, his relationships were more deeply rooted than we realized. More silence. Then a low, cold voice. Ms. Adler from legal. You didn't just let him go, Mr. Thornton. You replaced him with a third-party agency who addressed one of our clients as Mr. instead of Chairman in a Lunar New Year message. That's not premature. That's negligent. The word hung there, heavy as lead. Blake stammered. I take full responsibility. No. Ellison cut in. You've taken nothing. Not responsibility. Not feedback. Not even a moment to ask yourself how you lost control of this ship so fast. Blake froze. And that's when I entered the room. Not with fanfare. Not with a smirk. Just with quiet presence. I had been invited. Not by Blake, but by the board. As a consultant? No. As a witness. As evidence. I walked to the far side of the table and laid a single document in front of them. The timeline of partnership breakdowns, the client withdrawals, and the messages I had received, all sanitized, all legal, all damning. This is not about revenge, I said calmly. This is about truth. I'm not here to take anything back. I'm here to ensure no one else suffers for a mistake that should have been caught months ago. One of the board members leaned forward. If we brought you back, officially, what would it take? I met his gaze. Too late. A pause. A hush. Then I added, but I'll build something better, with people who understand that relationships are not assets. They're anchors. Ellison nodded slowly. Understood. I turned to leave, but not before catching Blake's eyes. Wide, uncertain, the look of a man who just realized the fire wasn't around him anymore. It was under his feet. And then I walked out. No security. No headlines. Just a man leaving a crumbling tower he didn't light, but refused to hold up. Outside, the sky was clear. Blue, clean, calm. I didn't need to win. I just needed them to see who held the line when everything else fell apart. And now they knew. 2 months later, I found myself standing in front of a whiteboard in a modest office space on the edge of downtown Denver. No logos. No suits. Just sunlight filtering through the windows and the sound of markers squeaking across fresh canvas. Behind me were 5 people. Young, smart, hungry. They weren't legacy hires. They weren't culture fits. They were people with open minds and open hearts who'd seen enough of the old world to want something different. This was mine now. Caldwell and Associates. We didn't have a slogan. We had a principle. Trust is the first deliverable. It was printed in small gray letters on the door, barely noticeable unless you were looking for it. And the people who were meant to find us did. Mr. Ling was the first client, but not the last. Soon came the sole distributor I'd once helped avoid a lawsuit, then a logistics firm in Jakarta who remembered how I stayed on the call at 3 a.m. during a border crisis. No marketing campaign, no LinkedIn blitz, just memory, just respect. One evening, I got a message from someone still inside Brightstone. Blake's been asked to step down. The board's bringing in someone less experimental. I didn't reply. There was nothing left to say. Blake had burned through everything he'd been handed, convinced it made him brighter. But the truth was, he was never fire. Just smoke in a borrowed mirror. And me? I was still building. Not to prove a point. Not to outshine anyone. Just to keep promises. Because in the end, success isn't measured by the empire you take back. It's measured by the people who follow you even after everything falls apart. So I wiped the whiteboard clean, picked up the marker, and began again. If you've made it this far, maybe you've met someone like Blake. Or maybe you've been Daniel. Overlooked, underestimated, silenced. But here's what this story reminds us. Being replaced doesn't mean you're worthless. Being quiet doesn't mean you're weak. And walking away doesn't mean you've lost. Sometimes the most powerful move isn't shouting to be heard. It's letting your absence speak louder than their noise. Tell us in the comments. Have you ever been pushed aside only to prove them wrong later? We want to hear your story. If this story moved you, hit that like button. It tells the algorithm that stories like this matter. Subscribe for more real, raw, and powerful stories like this one. And remember, Respect isn't given by title. It's earned by how you show up when no one's watching. See you in the next story.